For my part of the project, I looked at the value of housing as it changed over time in Canada and in specific parts of Canada. The value is measured as percentage change each year, um, and it does account for inflation. So inflation does not show up on these graphs, and this is more of value based on like comparatively to income of the average Canadian. The first thing I want to mention is that BC is the most sporadic out of all these provinces. It seems to indicate a different story that I did not have time to dive into. However, if there's interest in this topic, this might be something to look into as well. As we look to overall, we can see that the housing price index has almost tripled since 1981. So value of housing is almost 3 times more expensive, as you might expect from all the jokes about your parents being able to buy a house while you can't. As you can see, there's a bit of a hike in 2008 and an even bigger hike in 2019, as you might expect. And you can see that Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, I paired Manitoba and Saskatchewan because of the low population, experiences the hike the most. However, in all of these graphs, BC, Maritimes, Ontario, and Quebec, they both also experience that. So going into looking at, this is for 2008, as you can see here. I have the window from 2005 to 2009, and as we can see, due to the financial crisis in 2008, there was a significant jump in prices of houses. Alberta and Manitoba and Saskatchewan experienced the biggest hikes, as I mentioned before. However, there was an increase in all of these provinces. Even though Ontario, Quebec, and Maritimes are quite linear, there was a bit of an increase. As we swap to 2019 onwards to look at the COVID-19 effect, give me 1 second to switch over. So as you can see, in the years 2019 to 2022, there was a large hike in price in all provinces. As you might expect, due to COVID-19, it had a pretty severe effect on the housing market. And while in 2008, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta experienced the biggest hikes, now there seems to be a very large hike across the board. Ontario becoming the most expensive place to live in Canada. BC experiences a significant hike. Maritimes experiencing a bit of a hike, as well as Quebec. In order to give a somewhat accurate prediction of the future, I'm going to relate this to 2008 and give some predictions as a response to my research question. Coming back to the overall change, we can see there is a bit of a prediction function in Tableau that supported what my predictions initially were, was that it was going to flatten out now that we've exited a bit of COVID-19. Both the Tableau and actually what's happening in the real world seems to be reflecting this. As you can see here, it expects it to either decrease or flatten on each of these curves, which gives me a little bit of confidence in saying that potentially I might be right. However, you never know the future. We may have another crisis that may cause another spike in housing, but the economy would really struggle with that. That concludes my short part of my project. On to the next one.
Alrighty, so my big question of the day is, where is the best place to live in Canada right now? So I have preloaded the data for the last year of the housing index, and it's related to the min index, the maximum change in index, along with some quality of life things such as the dwelling conditions and the monthly rent non-response rates. So, as far as the housing index values over time, we can check over here. The minimum for Regina is the lowest, so relative to the income and the cost of other goods, Regina has the lowest housing costs, so if anyone wants a cheap place to live. In contrast, the highest currently is Quebec with a whopping 142.2 as a minimum. Since then, it's obviously gone higher. It's now gone up to 149.50. And then as far as the change in index is concerned, we see that Edmonton has a significant change in the housing index, which is the maximum value over the last year and the minimum value over the last year. It's changed by a whole 8.3 points. And Quebec with a whole 7.5 points, which makes sense given that the minimum and the maximum are quite significant. The other thing to note, perhaps contributing to this figure, is that Edmonton quite consistently has the highest non-response rate for any of the qualitative metrics. So mortgage payments, Edmonton leads, number of bedrooms, Edmonton leads, and currently I have just loaded up the monthly rent non-response rate and the dwelling conditions non-response rate. One quick fun fact for any of you historians out there, if we go back to 1981's data set, we see that every other capital city in Canada has had a very significant incline since then, while Victoria actually has dropped a very significant portion since then. Still ranks number two highest, but it's definitely nowhere near as bad as it once was. So once I'm leaving school, I'm definitely considering Regina currently for the cheapest cost of living, and I hope this helped you guys out with some of your future plans.
For my part of the project, I focused on analyzing the housing index value trends over time in our dataset. Specifically, I calculated the mean and maximum increase in value throughout the years to identify the most expensive months for the real estate market and the provinces where the housing index value increased the fastest. This data was derived by comparing the average income of a Canadian with the cost of buying a plot. To visually represent these findings, I created a graph that shows the monthly mean progression in the housing index value throughout our dataset. The graph depicts a linear increase from January at the bottom to December at the top. Additionally, I analyzed another graph that compared the monthly housing index value with the highest points it reached in the dataset. From this, we concluded that the last quarter of the year tends to be the most expensive for people interested in buying a property. So it's rather better to buy it in the first half of the year. Regarding the provinces, I took into account both the mean and the maximum housing index value each province hit. The maximum housing index value was reached in Manitoba and Quebec. However, provinces such as British Columbia and Prince Edward Island had an overall 2 into faster increase in value. To verify these results, I consulted research papers about the increase in housing value in these two provinces, and those results were also the same. Overall, my analysis insight into the most expensive months for the real estate market and the provinces where the housing index value has increased the fastest. This information can help guide decision-making process for real estate investors and home buyers. Thank you.